Burghead is a remote fishing village on the northeast coast of Scotland, set on a peninsula of land on the Moray Firth, and known locally as the Broch. 1500 years ago it was a great fortress of the Picts, and a stronghold of kings. It was also probably a naval power base, ideally located for campaigns and trade up and down the coast, and for navigating the Moray Firth. This carved stone, dating to the Dark Ages, shows one of the only surviving examples of a manned Pictish boat, along with a hunting scene and a horned bull engaged in battle with a writhing beast. Burghead was first put on the map in 150 AD by the Greek geographer Ptolemy in his chart of the known world. The fortress was immense, 3 times larger than other forts of its time. The upper reaches of the fort probably functioned as a citadel, housing accommodation for the king and his attendants, along with a feasting hall and buildings to hold tributes and taxes. 19th century excavations show its massive dry stone ramparts were latticed with great oak beams fastened with iron nails. Many stones of the outer face were chisel-dressed. The ramparts stood on a foundation of large boulders and were infilled with rubble. Similar fortifications have been discovered at the Pictish forts of Dundurn and Portnocky, and Caesar describes similar walls in France during his campaigns of AD 52, suggesting a common fortification technique across the ancient Celtic world. In the 9th century the fortress was attacked and smashed by the Vikings, who probably occupied the site for the next 200 years and gave Burghead its name. The remnants of vast earthworks can still be seen today, but the great fortress was mostly destroyed in the early 1800s to make way for a new village and harbour. These maps show the peninsula with the old village and its earthworks before the fort was destroyed, and the new village, which is pretty much the same as it is today. During the new building work of the early 1800s, up to 30 bull stones were discovered. Today only 6 survive. These carved stones are now considered masterpieces of Pictish art and would have probably originally lined the entrance to the fort. Great power was ascribed to bulls, being symbols of strength and virility. They were a primary sacrificial animal in Celtic and pre-Celtic society, being ritually killed for divination. Also discovered during the clearing of the earthworks was an underground well. 20 steps cut from living rock lead down to a chamber with a pool at its centre, surrounded on all sides by a narrow ledge. Water is a prime element of nature, and wells and springs were held sacred in ancient times, being associated with healing powers and spirits. They were believed to be connected to the other world, and were also used ritually for divination. A predecessor of the Burghead well can be found close by along the dramatic coastline. The cliff faces are riddled with caves, the most famous of which is known as the Sculptor's Cave. The cave has 2 entrances, and is profusely carved with inscriptions and symbols. One inscription at the passage mouth dates to the 17th century, and curses all those who enter or plunder the cave. Excavations have shown the cave to have been in use since the late Bronze Age. At that time the cave was filled with water that seeped through the rock, and votive offerings were cast into the pool. Stake holes in the western passage show where a wooden platform might have overlooked the pond. Over 2,000 human bones have been excavated in the sculptor's cave. Cut marks at the neck show the heads were ritually removed, and it's likely that the skulls would have lined the entrance to the cave. Some of the bones have been carbon dated to as late as the 3rd or 4th century AD. Parallels to the sculptor's cave are known across the Celtic world, where worship of the human head was common. Evidence suggests that the soul was believed to reside in the head, which was often removed and preserved in a sacred place. The cave has an abundance of later Pictish and Christian symbols and crosses, showing the longevity of its importance as a ritual centre. Much later the cave was secretly used by smugglers, and the Jacobites even hid horses in the cave in 1745. It is believed that the well might also have been used for ceremonial drowning, which historical sources show was the traditional method of execution amongst the Picts. Taligin, son of King Athol, was put to death by this method in 739. This peculiar carved stone Pictish head was reputedly discovered in the well. Later, the well was likely used for Christian baptism. In Celtic mythology, like the well, the cauldron had similar magical properties, and numerous depictions of cauldrons can be found on Pictish stones. Here at Glamis we find 2 pairs of legs disappearing into a cauldron below which 2 warriors are engaged in single combat, an image reminiscent of the regenerative powers of the cauldrons of the Celtic gods. Similar imagery is found earlier on the Iron Age Gundestrup cauldron from Denmark, and again here on a Pictish stone from St. Vichens. Later, legends of the cauldron most likely evolved into the Christian myths of the Holy Grail. An early Christian chapel was founded at Burghead in the 7th century, dedicated to the Irish Saint Aidan. And overlooking the chapel site, atop the great Pictish fortress, stands Doory Hill with its tar-stained altar, said by locals to be where the Druids called the return of the sun in midwinter with that other great element of nature, fire, and where once a year you can still witness one of the oldest and most authentic fire festivals of Northern Europe, said to date back at least 1500 years, the burning of the Clavie. On the evening preceding the old New Year's Eve, a gathering of men assemble in the netting shed of Dan Ralph, the Clavie king of Burghead, to watch the age-old custom of the building of the Clavie. The Clavie crew themselves, who build the Clavie, are traditionally fishermen, and their elected king is king for life. Mention must be made of the significance of the iron nail. Since its emergence in the Iron Age, iron has been invested with many magical properties. Excavations show that it was sometimes placed at the entrance of burial chambers, a superstition that survived in Scotland into the 19th century, iron being placed in graves and hidden on the threshold of houses to prevent the intrusion of evil influences. Dark Age spells and charms included practices with iron. Objects were circled thrice with iron. It was placed in water for cures and cast as offerings into wells, emphasis usually being on that the iron must not be touched.
Aye, wrong good advice. It was a shot. Somebody will get shot.
Oh, he's shot. There we go.
The clavie is constructed out of an old Archangel tar barrel, which is sawn in two and fixed to a salmon fisher's stake, called a spoke, which is some 6 feet in length. This is done by means of a forged iron nail, driven home by an old stone hurling ball. The same iron nail has been used and reused since time immemorial, and according to ancient custom, no metal must touch it. The use of what is effectively a Stone Age implement for this suggests the remote antiquity of the custom.
You're good at throwing stones.
Windy's that's a problem.
Just to be on the safe side.
With practised hands, the staves of the barrel are adds to shape and nailed at intervals all around the lower parts of the clavie, whilst the other ends are firmly fixed to the spoke. Traditionally a father-to-son custom, the next generation of clavie crew are encouraged to participate.
One weekend.
Well done.
Is there a special mark?
Take the edges off.
I didn't blow it.
Well, we must be one stuff.
As twilight deepens on the 11th of January, the old New Year's Eve of the pre-1753 Julian calendar, a crowd steadily gathers by a wall close to the Clavie king's house, and the last fire of the old year burns in the back garden of a local cottage, the site of a house from the old village, now long since gone. All the church ministers have now left town, and the Clavie king collects a burning peat from the last fire of the year, from which to kindle the first fire of the new year.
Oh yeah, boy.
Right.
Oh well,
You want to keep them going, you see?
No, we'll create some, we'll run.
Stick with the wood, mate.
Feel like that.
Okay.
I see why you want the breeze now. The Clavie is coaxed into flames and is filled with staves amidst ringing cheers.
Clear the space!
The Clavie bearer puts his head between the staves and sets off with his blazing burden through the streets of Burghead. The procession makes first for the harbour, where the Clavie casts a path of light across the blackness of the sea. The word Clavie itself is probably a corruption of the Gaelic Cleave, meaning basket. From time to time the Clavie changes hands, each member of the crew taking his turn. If the bearer stumbles, it is considered bad luck for himself and the community. The route followed goes clockwise, or sunwise, apparently a ghostly path through the boundaries and streets of the town as it was prior to its rebuilding in the early 1800s. Every now and then a burning faggot is flung through an open door or distributed to residents. Embers of the Clavie are considered lucky, and not so long ago they were firmly believed to safeguard from the evil eye. The luck of the ember is said to last a year. Witches were notoriously hostile to fishermen, and traditionally the embers were placed up cottage chimneys to prevent them and evil spirits from entering the house. In the past the crowd could be heard shouting, "There go the witches," as the sparks of the Clavie flew. Burghead Clavie is one of the last great survivals of a Yuletide practice that once blazed all along our northern shores. At one time, clavies burned in all the fishing ports of the region on the last day of December. 17th century reports tell us that boats would circumnavigate the harbour with fir torches, the rite safeguarding the boats from evil and ensuring a successful year. Food and drink too were carried aboard and superstitiously cast about the deck, along with the embers of the clavie. The earliest written mention of the Burghead Clavie dates to 1690, when parish records from a neighbouring village tell that a lady was banished from the kirk for going to watch the clavie. Indeed, from Kirk session records of the period emerges the incredible fact that Druidism was still considered practised all over Scotland. We read that bull sacrifice was still in common practice, that oblations of milk were being poured over the hills, land dedicated to the fairy folk was left uncultivated, special places were dedicated for charms and spells, and pagan rites were practised with hallow fires. The church decided to uproot the remains of druidical superstition and sorcery, and the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland appointed a commission which abolished these ancient customs under severe penalty. Today, health and safety regulations are the modern-day threat to the last survivors of our unrestrained traditions.
Come on, Rachel, get in there. Come on. It's round you.
Like the orange shawls. Get no hair on it, get some
That's my number two son. That's my number two son.
Hi, you've got it! Hey, twice you never said it! Twice! Oh, what did you tell you? Oh, get a roster. Scott! Auntie was the shouting.
Finally, the crowd is led up the large grassy knowe known as Doory Hill, where the crew bear the clavie up its banks to a stone pillar which the clavie is mounted on. Fresh fuel is piled on the clavie, and with great daring fresh tar is poured into its flaming mass, to the delight of the engulfing crowd. After a while the crew begin scattering the final embers of the clavie about the hill, distributing good fortune for the new year, before hacking the remains of the clavie to pieces with a great clawed hammer and recovering the iron nail for next year. Wild scrambles ensue on the banks to secure an ember of the clavie and the good luck that it brings, just as in the days of the sacred fires of the Druids.
May the sun aye lift your footsteps with a star your course to steer. May good fortune shine upon you as we talk another year. May the breeze aye blow ahin you and fill your body sail, but nae as strong as last year's in yon off a clavie gale.